Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are here for real this time now. I'm not even going to do the intro because I don't want to waste any more time. Anyway, let me put on my banner. If you want to support me, become a patron. Okay, cool, we're done. Okay, so we're going to be debunking a really crap, and I mean that in the highest sense of the word, a really crap Muslim apologetics video. Christian, you brought this to my attention. Why did you do so?
I had because I get sent stuff by followers who are worrying about stuff. Like I often get, especially after my recent Muslim interactions on the Incarnation. Go to the page and see my interactions on the Incarnation, debunking Muslim apologetics. Okay. So people have been sending me these various things, and somebody asked me about the reliability of Scripture. And I was like, well, what have you been watching about it? And they sent me this like 3-minute clip, and I watched it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is literally the worst thing I have ever seen in my entire life. It is that bad. And people watch, and there's like, I think if I'm remembering correctly, there's like thousands of views on this thing too. And people are actually like caring about it.
Bismillah, brother. Thank you for this great work against the Jesus worshippers. Alhamdulillah. They are so, my word, they are like, the fans of Muslim apologetics can be among the most gullible group in human history. And before we jump into it, Christian, can you, for real this time, introduce our other guest?
Yes, this is St. Augustine of Hippo. So he was a early 5th century, late 4th century bishop of the African city of Hippo. And he defeated the Pelagians and Donatists in the Pelagian crisis and the Donatist crisis. He is known as one of the most influential Christian theologians on the Western Latin theology. Also very important for Eastern theology as well. He wrote certain works such as De Trinitate and the Anti-Pelagian Corpus. Very important author.
I think he's trying to tell you right now that he wants you to do a really good takedown of the Mohammedans in his honor.
I know. It's like, imagine the type of like base response you would have got from Augustine against the Muslims.
Oh, yeah. That would be the funniest. Oh, I would love to see that happen. But once he's back up and running in his former adult self, we'll be able to see what that's like.
Yep.
But yes, ladies and gentlemen, let's bring up the video right here. And it is a Muslim apologetic video called "Is the New Testament Corrupt?" posted by, what do they call, Calling Christians, Muslim Apologetics Ministry.
How many views does this thing have? Yeah, 1,200 for this crap. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I mean,
look how many followers they got.
Sorry, how many followers?
Yeah,
8.8K. They should have more than that.
Can you believe they have like 10 times the amount of followers that either of us have, and they just produce crap like this?
To me.
Oh my gosh, we need to start producing like crap 2-minute videos like this, and then
I did that. I did that with YouTube Shorts, and I'm gonna start doing it again because they're the best. They're easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, this video is nice and short, so we'll probably like pause like at most once or twice in it, but we ought to get through it pretty darn quickly. And God willing, if our viewers have taken any wisdom from the both of us, they will know. They will be able to see right through the absolute bull.
the Mohammedan charade.
Yes, actually, let me quickly stop sharing because StreamYard is so dumb. By default, by default, it doesn't include the volume when you have it.
Morning.
Share tab audio.
Matt Bell said good morning. Like, is it morning?
Good morning.
Is it over there in that upside down part of the world?
It is in fact morning in the only real part of the world. Indeed.
Australia is fake.
Both. Morning, Matt Bell. Hope you're going well. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's commence. Let us watch this absolute cringe. Tell me if you can't hear it or if it sounds like it's coming through my mic and not the actual thing itself.
How do we know that the New Testament has been corrupted?
It's a bit quiet.
Oh, for frick's sake, I knew this would happen. Okay, you know what? I'm going to stop sharing again. I've got to share a specific tab because for some dumb reason, it doesn't automatically include the audio. So I'm just going to share the tab individually, and that should include the audio. Tell me if it goes.
How do we know that the New Testament
yeah, that's better.
Over time? Today we'll show you a simple example. The first book of the New Testament is generally referred to as the Gospel of Matthew.
Oh.
However, has not always been the case. The earliest manuscript evidence of this gospel has no name or title given to it.
Wait, pause it.
The original title of this gospel didn't
Wait, the other Paul. Is it inspired in the Gospel of Matthew? The name of the title?
God breathe. I don't think it is, man. I thought it was. I thought my good ESV and King James versions, they have the names on them. I thought they were inspired, bro. What's going on? I thought Jesus himself gave the table of contents, bro.
What?
What the frick is this? What the frick is this?
So wait. So oh gosh. Wait, that the other Paul, it makes sense. Since nowhere else in the gospel it's actually referred to Matthew, that would make sense. That the literal title isn't the only place that Matthew didn't just write the gospel according to Matthew when he sent it out.
You're right. Let's keep going. Maybe there's some more esoteric wisdom they'll say here.
refer to itself as a gospel at all. The real title of the Gospel of Matthew was actually the first line of the document, which when read says, "The Book of the Genealogy of Jesus Christ." That's it. No mention of it being a gospel, no mention of any Matthew being an author. 100 years later, in the 4th century CE, a later...
Wait. They're using the Mormon plates image.
Bro, this is exactly how that's exactly how it was passed on. We had these like nice binders where we put golden plates in it. That's the Gospel of Matthew right there.
Oh my gosh! And the angel Moroni himself made sure that not one letter or word was changed in the gospel.
Thank you, Angel Moroni, for helping us keep our gospel. So 100 years later, that's crazy. So what I'm thinking is that in the first century context, when the gospels were being passed on, that it was being passed on by the apostles to the communities they were over. I think they wouldn't need a title, right? Because they knew the person was. So I think
that as well.
So I think like a generation or two later, when it was getting spread to the rest of the world, I think they might have to put a title on it. So scribes just wrote a title at the top.
Yeah, and you know what? Now that I think about it, it reminds me of Caesar's Gallic Wars right here. His commentaries on the Gallic War. Let's see the very beginning of the book, shall we? It says, Gallia est omnis divisa in partes tres, or Gaul is divided into 3 parts, one of which is inhabited by the Belgae, another by the Aquitani, and a third by the people called in their own tongue, Celtae, in the Latin Galli. Where does Caesar name himself here? I'm confused. Where do we get the authorship of Caesar for this book? I am so confused. In fact, if I look through this entire book, nowhere does there ever say that I, Caesar, or even in the third person, Caesar, wrote these commentaries. How did people know it was actually by him then? I am so befuddled right now, man.
Wait. I think if I look at my Summa, I don't even think it says St. Thomas Aquinas wrote it. Did Thomas Aquinas write the Summa? Oh, some Thomas Aquinas. It's a forgery.
No. We need to do some real historical criticism now. The Summa, it was not actually from Thomas Aquinas, but it was attributed by him by the Scotists in order to confound that. No. In fact, by the later Thomists themselves, in order to give their view some credence, that a great man of faith supported their view.
I think it was made up in order to own the Molinists. I think that's where it's from, honestly.
You're right.
Because
the true church was Molinist until the Thomists came along.
Oh gosh, the title just must be wrong. And then if you look in multiple manuscripts where it says different titles, like some are shortened and some are lengthened,
because clearly
through corruption.
Because clearly the only explanation for there not being an exact title in certain manuscripts must mean that therefore not only was there simply not a title, but the author himself was just totally unknown or just some random off the street. Let's keep watching this. They should give us some extra wisdom.
I think the Quran and the Hadith. Really? Oh.
I don't want to do that capturing Christianity look now. I've done way too many open jaws. Let's keep going.
The title to an already published manuscript of the New Testament. They went to each of the first 4 books of the New Testament and added a title to the start of each book. This is when
they said something about redacted.
CE, hang on. 100 years later, in the 4th century CE, a later anonymous editor added a title to an already published manuscript of the New Testament. They went to each of the first 4 books of the New Testament and added a title to the start of each book.
This
This
is so
when the
painful.
title, according to Matthew, is historically known to have been used
Kill
in any
me.
published edition of the New Testament as a title for the first gospel.
Wait, pause this crap.
Here we
No,
see
no,
the
no, no, we gotta finish. Let's
identification of
finish.
the
Let's
author
finish.
in a published
Okay,
edition.
fine. What are you gonna say? What are you gonna say?
Okay, but he says that in the 4th century is when it was first attributed to Matthew. But
Yep.
Saint Irenaeus of Lyon also attributes a gospel to Matthew.
Here's the thing. This why this video is so sloppy is because it's based on a paper by Ijaz Ahmad, one of the more scummy Muslim apologists online, and he himself in his paper explicitly says he's not dealing with alleged patristic attributions, and yet right after that, so you would expect him to at least be humble and say,
Yeah.
so this isn't the end of the question, but in the end he still says, but the fact that there's an evolution in titles, quote unquote, shows that the authorship changed over time.
But
wasn't developed.
even in like
It's a load of absolute bull. I was going to save most of my critique towards the end, but I may as well give a bunch.
Even in manuscript evidence, when we do textual criticism, we don't only look at the Greek version of the New Testament. We look at the Syriac version. We look at the Latin versions. We look at these multiple different versions. And even before the 4th century, those versions which were translated before the 4th century still have it attributed to Matthew. So
there you go. I'd like to look that up. I'd like to look that up myself.
Yeah, just look up in your NA28 and it's right there.
Oh, sweet. There you go. Actually, I might grab that in just a sec. Oh, it's not a proper Nestle Allen. It's only a UBS Reader's Edition, which is kind of gay. Yeah, there's that. And also, there's actually something really interesting with the first manuscript they look at. I don't think they've looked at it just yet, or maybe they have. Yes, no, the first manuscript. They said the first manuscript mentioned, and it's in Ijaz's paper. And I want to show something very soon once we finish this that really throws that into the woodshed. But also a thing to keep in mind is the fact that what's our manuscript evidence before the 4th century? It's better than pretty much every other work of antiquity, and yet it's still not fantastic because, for one, when we're talking about the Bible, we're talking about a whole collection of books, all right? So for individually Matthew, they don't even do the basic. Even Ijaz doesn't do this very thing in his paper when he tries to give the veneer of scholarship without actually properly doing it. He doesn't even look at, well, what is the actual scale of manuscript evidence for the beginnings of Gospels, for example, through which we can then try to determine a trend. Because the problem here is that, as far as I'm aware, the amount of manuscripts that actually exists of this time period of the beginnings of Gospels that presumably would or would not contain a title is almost non-existent. And yet, if we move on further in this video, they're going to say something that's just freaking retarded, given the
for the first time. This identification comes roughly 300 years after Christians believed this document was first written. 100 years later, in the 5th century, we see the title being changed again. This time, the title reads as the Gospel according to Matthew. 400 years later, in the 9th century, we see the final change as we know it today. The title for the first book of the New Testament now reads the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Bro, they added holy to it.
Just seen,
Dude, Christianity.
in 700 years, the title for the first book of the New Testament has evolved significantly over time. This table simplifies things quite a bit.
Okay, perfect. This is it. Okay, so this is from Ijaz's paper in which they base it, and it's in the description here, and I have it up myself. So if I want to look at it, we can do that. But before we begin, this is going to require some weapons grade autism, so I need to put on my protection. So okay,
Cover the boys' ears.
There we go. So weapons grade autism. I've got my protection on. We're good. Okay, so notice what they're doing there. What's wrong with this picture? Where they give this little table of contents about how the title evolved, quote unquote, and they're not just simply saying, "Oh, these manuscripts say this title and then this title and that."
They say
they're saying it's a trend. They're saying it's actually the norm. Okay, so at one time, according to one manuscript, it's blank. Therefore, it's the norm that Matthew's gospel was blank without a title, and then Sinaiticus comes along. That's actually maybe Sinaiticus does say that, but Ijaz's paper says Vaticanus, not Sinaiticus. But maybe Sinaiticus comes along and it says according to Matthew, right? So now it's the norm, and that would be katamataion in Greek. So now, according to this, because of one manuscript, it's now the norm that it's the norm that it's just called according to Matthew. And then by the 5th century, because of one other manuscript, now it's suddenly the norm that the title is the gospel court. Do you see the problem here,
Yeah,
people?
yeah,
And
it's
Christian saying
what
on the
so
basis
what's this
of,
one dude? What's this one dude that's going around telling everybody to change the titles in their gospels? Like,
Yeah,
get down,
exactly.
everybody!
Rather than-
It's the 4th century. Change the titles on your gospels.
Yeah, that's it. Rather than what makes much more bloody sense, and that there's simply scribal preferences in how they give a title. That's it. Where is this title regulation agency that the apologists here have to ascribe as a thing in existence? I mean, I guess you could say the papacy, but what the Muslims say was in place that actually enforce these titles as norms, and it forces us to get into a bit of rambling, because as Ijaz himself admits in the paper, and yet this very video doesn't acknowledge. In fact, let's finish. There's only a few seconds left, and you'll see why.
Having no explicit title and no author, to having an author, to then having both an author and being described as a gospel, to then finally being described as a holy gospel by a well-known author. And this is just the first line of the New Testament.
So it wasn't, let's take this consistently for what they want us to think. They want you to think. So context. Okay, this isn't coming from the exact same polemical line as atheist apologists do, although they're arguing for the same thing. They're arguing here that this is an example of the New Testament being corrupted because the Quran allegedly says so, which apparently it actually doesn't technically. But that's the common Muslim apologetic, that the New Testament has been corrupted by the Christians over time, the true message of Jesus and all. And they try to say that the authorship of Matthew, the title, is an example of this corruption. Okay. And it's not the exact same kind of argument as saying that Matthew wasn't written by Matthew, although Ijaz does basically say that in his thing where he says that the author evolved over time. In his conclusion, his paper, that the author evolved over time because the Christians did that. Now, on top of the issue, the obvious problem of trying to establish a trend based on one manuscript per century, okay, trying to establish a normative trend. Let's just acknowledge
And he
that.
jumps from 5th to 9th century too.
Yeah, that's it.
There's literally thousands of manuscripts between that 5 and that 9 right there.
Well, to be fair, when you're talking about the manuscripts of like the beginning of a gospel, like a specific section, the number goes down, obviously. But here's the funny thing: if we want to follow their logic consistently and say, look, Matthew wasn't authored by Matthew because that was evolved later, that was only a later title, are we therefore to also conclude that Matthew's gospel wasn't considered a gospel because gospel was only in the title by the 5th century? Are we to conclude that? Are they seriously going to propose that before the 5th century, that work of Matthew, as is called Matthew, was not considered a gospel? Are they really going to propose that?
Get debunked, Jesus worshiper.
This, ladies and gentlemen,
it's so silly.
And
again, I would also like to point out that for the 5th century, the gospel according to Matthew, Codex Bezae, like that's literally one of the worst copies you could possibly go off of. So that is representative of like literally just one dude. Like literally entire verses are just taken out or completely changed in Codex Bezae. It's no joke.
There you go. And actually, I wonder if this switches. Does it switch to? Okay, no, it doesn't. So I have to share a new tab now. I'm going to bring up Ijaz Ahmad's paper, which this
Scholarly
is based
research,
on.
Independent.
Oh yeah,
research,
absolutely 10 out of 10.
And then also we have to discuss the question of it's pretty obvious. We have to discuss the question of whether the title of a gospel is an object of infallibility.
Yeah, that's
and
it.
Nobody says yes.
Yeah, this is the key thing right here. Okay, so their core argument is to demonstrate the New Testament is corrupt. The problem is the titles are never considered part of the book itself, part of the text itself. So that alone, even if we granted literally every syllable of their argument here, that actually does not establish their case at all that the New Testament has been corrupted, quote unquote, because it's not actually in the body of text. And titles were very often not within the main text itself. If you look at, for example, just off the top of my head, the paper by Simon Gathercole, The Alleged Anonymity of the Gospels. He actually references the many different ways that titles may be attached to works of antiquity. And most of them are not having the title in the body of the text itself, which makes sense because you'll often see, for example, I can name, well, we've got Caesar's Gallic War here. We've got Xenophon's oh bloody hell, what's it called again? Anabasis, the Anabasis. And we've got the works of Tacitus itself, the Annals and the Histories, and they do not ascribe their authorship. So how do people know who the author was? If we're going to take the Muslim and the atheist apologetic consistently, then simply put, they were totally anonymous works who were then, because of super spiro religious reasons, attached to Tacitus or attached to Caesar, because made up reasons that we can make up because we're secularists and we can posit whatever sterile conjecture we want.
Caesar debunked.
Yeah, Caesar's debunked here, guys. Caesar is heavily debunked. Yes, so now here's Ijaz. I bring up his conclusion to make sure that this is actually what he's trying to argue, not merely that the title was evolved, but that the authorship itself is fabricated. He says in his conclusion, Ijaz Ahmad, the evolution of the title of the first gospel is quite a curious one. It's not at all scribal tendencies in how to title the gospel. That's it. Very bloody simple. It's not an evolution. It's not a conspiracy. While this study did not undertake an assessment of the patristic references to the gospel's authorship, the manuscript tradition of the gospels in scriptio clearly demonstrates a century by century development of the identity.
What's that footnote right there?
Author.
What's that footnote right there? Footnote 18. What does he say down there?
Oh no, I think I know what it is. Bart Ehrman's blog.
Oh no. And then BibleHub.com, man, this is some serious research, dude.
This is top tier scholarship, bro. Oh man, but yeah, so he points to Ehrman. Oh no, wow, he points to Ehrman for the development of its identities. So this is Ehrman's blog post. The Gospels are finally named, Irenaeus of Lyon. And he also comments, while church history is important in providing context to textual critical developments in the New Testament, the scope of this study is to restrict it to the scriptural manuscript tradition of the New Testament. And he doesn't qualify that in the way he should, that titles are not part of the body of text itself. It's actually that bloody simple. Technically, it is text critical. This is a text critical issue, but not in the same way as the actual text itself. It is very easy to simply see, hey, scribes got this Gospel of Matthew. They name it according to what they want, or whoever commissioned the work, what they want to simply title it. It simply shows, what all this simply shows is that there wasn't a single formal title to the gospel at the beginning. That's it. And that's cool. That is a perfectly fine conclusion right there. You can say the same for many other ancient works of antiquity. Let's just say many works you have, which have a clear title, like the Gaelic War, for example, don't actually have that title, simply made that way by the translator, for example. Some people call it the Gaelic War, some people call it the commentaries, some people call it the commentaries on the Gaelic War. So, hey, therefore, the authorship of the Gaelic War is totally unknown, am I right? It just came from no one to some other random dude.
Debunked.
It's absolutely hilarious. And Ahmad's scholarship here, this is what he bases it on. He actually does say Sinaiticus. Where does he say? Doesn't he mention Vaticanus? This is
Control F that baby.
Yeah. Codex Vaticanus. It should be known that. Okay, so he equates them both. Codex is generally seen as contemporaneous to Codex Vaticanus. So he's actually so he actually misses out on some data here. Codex Vaticanus. I checked my Vaticanus Gospel pseudo facsimile, and sure enough, it includes this exact same title, Kata Mataion. But for his point, that doesn't change anything. He says it's a century by century evolution. And to stress the main response to this once again for like the 12th time, just to make sure people get it, this means nothing. It simply shows that scribes gave different types of titles to the same work, and yet they were generally the same type of title, all ascribing it to Matthew. That's it. All this proves that there wasn't a set title at the beginning. Now, what I want to most address here is his use of Papyrus 1. His entire argument hinges that the earliest manuscript, the sole earliest manuscript we have for Matthew's Gospel, called Papyrus 1, has no title. Therefore, there is an evolution from no title to a title, and thus non sequitur, from no author to an author. Now, key problem, of course, being that the manuscript evidence of this specific beginning of the Gospel of Matthew is not very massive. In fact, this is the earliest, as he himself shows, is actually the earliest manuscript we have for it. So it actually doesn't mean a whole ton at all, especially when we have church fathers from a century before it ascribing authorship to Matthew. So his article's purpose is entirely meaningless. And yet, here's the thing. I'm going to share a second screen now. And it is actually the papyrus itself. Let me Microsoft Edge, manuscript P1, share tab. All right. So this is from the CSNTM, the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts, and it includes their super high quality HD epic 4K elite images of the gospel of manuscripts, of papyri manuscripts. Now here's the thing. So actually, no, another thing to address that I forgot to address. He mentions that the title of Matthew's gospel, the video mentioned that the title of Matthew's gospel is actually the bit where it says the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. They claim that that's actually the title of the book itself, therefore demonstrating that, that those other titles are simply later fictions. Actually not true, because we see the very same phenomena in the book of Genesis itself, in Genesis chapter 2, 3, or 5, I believe 5, where it actually said, now this is the book of the generations of Adam. So it actually says that for a specific section, it actually calls a specific section in Genesis a book. In fact, let me share that right now before we get onto this. Let's go to Genesis.
It's clearly a Hebraism that was completely lost on the Mohammedan.
Yeah, that's it. They don't get it at all. And I'm just going to the random Hebrew site I have. I believe it's based on the.
I was waiting when I was watching this video for them to draw the conclusion that the original of Matthew was literally only the genealogy.
My word. Okay, so look at this. This is Genesis chapter 5 here, okay? And we can acknowledge that even if you grant the documentary hypothesis, that eventually this came to one solid work. And yet, in chapter 5, it says, this is the book of the generations of Adam. Of a specific section, it calls it a book. And one good reason for that is because the word for book, books technically are not books as we consider it today. Like this is evolved from the codex, which is a later invention where you bind pages together and you can flip them over. Whereas a book originally would refer to a scroll. Okay, so one way you can say is simply, this is the scroll of generations of Adam. It's potentially that way. It maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Point being, that's important because works would often be divided across multiple scrolls. So maybe this is the beginning of another scroll right here, maybe. And we said in Hebrew, of course, Zeh Sefer, this is the book, Toldoth Adam, of the generations of Adam. So point being, that being at the beginning of Matthew's gospel of this is the generation of Jesus does not actually make that the title of the entire gospel of Matthew, simply that specific section. Now, to get to my main point here we have this papyrus one right here, the earliest papyrus on the beginning of the gospel of Matthew. And look at that. Even if you don't read Greek, you can't see a title up here. You can't see a title. You simply see the beginning right there. Biblos Geneseos Jesu Christou. Yep, the typical stuff. Now, here's the problem with appealing to this manuscript as evidence of a lack of title in the manuscript tradition early on. Christian, what do you notice of the top up here?
Completely missing. It looks like there's some other stuff written on there too.
In fact, they're all right there.
It looks like there's a kappa right there. Not gonna lie.
It looks like the top has been torn off. Are you getting the picture now, Muslim apologists?
But imagine, but they don't do textual criticism in.
No, they don't.
No, they don't. Even though they need to.
They don't. He didn't.
Like, imagine looking at a 9th century like Quran manuscript. That thing's not going to be in good health.
That's it. But yes, the top of this manuscript is torn. It's not a complete manuscript. And we see the same on the bottom down here. Look at that. Big tear continues down over here. Missing. So is this evidence, Christian? Is this evidence of a lack of title in this gospel?
I think I've been debunked. I think the Christians are right. My Muslim affinities have been debunked by based Christian textual critical studies.
Absolutely.
It just shows. I think it. I don't want to impute this to them, but I think at least for the one guy who wrote the original paper, this is definitely some dishonesty going on here.
Oh yeah, huge dishonesty, massive dishonesty.
Because if he's claiming what he is claiming, then because he's referencing the apparatus to the NA28 and all this stuff, so he isn't dumb. He knows what's going on, but he's presenting it in such a way where he's just being dishonest.
Yeah, totally dishonest. Totally 100% dishonest. And every single one of his claims, that's the problem here. Every single one of his claims relies, the evidence can technically be said to be compatible with his claim. And I stress this so much. There is a difference between the evidence being compatible with a claim versus actually preferring that claim. So he provides all this evidence, which we can say is technically compatible with his thesis, that there was an evolution of the title over time, over centuries, all that jazz. But it doesn't actually demonstrate it at all. It is perfectly demonstrated, perfectly explained otherwise, as simply, well, for one, you got the top of this manuscript missing here, so the title may actually be here. We don't know. And then also for the other titles where they quote unquote change, that's simply scribal tendencies. What does the scribe prefer to call this? I might prefer just to call it katamatayon, keep it simple, or someone who's especially pious. No. I'm going to call it the Hagion Evangelion Matayu. I'm going to give it an especially pious title. All perfectly possible. No reason against that given by Ijaz Ahmad. He simply assumes that his conclusion is the only one. And likewise with the makers of this video, as well as the poor lad who chose to actually voice the video. Whoever did that, I feel so sorry for you, my man. But yes, that's basically it. That's basically all we needed to say. It's a really bad video based on bad assumptions and total non-existent skill in text criticism.
Yep,
so
that's about right.
That's pretty much everything. But if anyone has questions, how long can you hang for?
I probably need to get going now. I got to eat dinner before my Greek class.
Oh yeah, your Greek class, my Greek class. Well, I'll hang around. I'll hang around for a few more minutes if anyone wants to ask questions or whatever. Or I interact with the chat. But Christian, what's your takeaway from this?
I would actually like to see whether there actually is good Muslims doing stuff like this, because I don't think there is. I don't think there's any like particularly astute Muslim textual critics arguing on that basis against Christianity. But if there were, I'd like to see it. Just see something a bit better than this, because this is obviously a bit pop. But we did go into the actual article, which it's based off of. So
yeah, that's it. But yeah, that's I don't think there are good. Ironically, there are good Muslim textual critics on the Quran, ones who are honest about its development and changes. And maybe there are good Muslim textual critics of the Bible, but if they're a good textual critic, they are almost certainly not an apologist, because simply put, the evidence doesn't go their way. So
yep,
yeah.
Okay, I'll talk to you later, the other Paul.
Catch a Christian. Have a good one.
Yep, you too.
All right. Yeah, that's basically it. It's just, in fact, I'll read through a little bit more of the article just to poke a few more holes for fun. Something you're going to notice as well is how often he says, "Oh, scholarship says this, scholarship says that," as if that means anything. And he does the typical thing as Muslim apologists do and appeal to Bart Ehrman as evidence. So look a little bit more. For many Christians, the authorial identity behind the first gospel, as per the Augustinian author, commonly attributed to Matthew, usually appears to be a matter of little or no concern. No. I mean, well, there's those who don't think about it, but I don't know any Christians except like hyper-liberal progressive Christians who don't think it's of any concern, but sure, whatever. This is in part due to the inscriptio of the gospel itself, as is found in most modern translations of the New Testament. Without this inscriptio, the first mention of the name of Matthew appears in Matthew 9:9. While at first this may not seem like an issue of note, critical examination of the inscriptio with respect to its inception and eventual adoption and evolution can give us deep insight into the perception of this document by the contemporaneous or its perception of this document by those contemporaneous or its creation and development. Yeah, nah. At best, it can tell you. At best, it gives you like a fragment of an idea of maybe what the scribe thought who wrote the manuscript. So I mentioned, for example, why one copy of Matthew might be called simply according to Matthew, katamatayon, versus I believe it was actually let's go down. Versus yeah, here we go. Hagion Evangelion katamatayon. So maybe why some simply call it katamatayon is simply for brevity. That's all you need to say. Katamatayon, very simple. Versus another one who calls it Hagion Evangelion katamatayon. They want to simply they have a high They want to emphasize their reverence of the book. Maybe that's why or simply put, their reverence of the book leaks into how they title the book. And so they call it the Hagion Evangelion Katamataion. So yeah, that's a very simple, easy explanation, not an evolution of the identity of the author. That's an absolute non sequitur, because you cannot establish a trend with one manuscript per century, which then extends to a gap of what, 4 centuries or 3 centuries between Beze and Campianus. You can't establish a trend like that. That's just not how this works. His article would be much more capable if he actually addressed patristic citations of the Gospel of Matthew. But of course, that's going to be a big problem, because simply put, the patristic testimony, whenever they talk about Matthew's authorship, it's all unanimous. It's all by Matthew. There are those who quote from the Gospel but don't name him, sure, in the same way that many ancient authors will quote from something and yet not name the author. Simple as that. Such as, for example, when Paul quoted, what was that pagan for? In Acts 17, he quoted a pagan author who said, "In him and through him we all live, or we all in him and through him we have our being," or something like that. Paul quotes a pagan author, doesn't name him, and it's from a work, I want to say by Epictetus, but I can't be 100% sure. But this is an author who's known of that work, and Paul doesn't name him. You therefore, unlike what atheists and Muslims try to do with quotations of the gospel, you can't therefore say, "Oh, look, they don't name him, therefore it may actually be anonymous," which is that's just straight up retarded. Sorry, but yeah, this doesn't work. It's just really don't even need to look at more. I don't have to look at more of the article, because its key claims and assumptions we've demonstrated just be totally bunk. And I don't want to go on too much longer with this stream. I want to keep it somewhat brief, but I want to look at a few more bits at poor how I say it, poor scholarship. Papyrus 1 is the earliest extant manuscript of this gospel. The papyrus itself measures 1 blah 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 blah. Interest is the recto. Yep. Folio. Extreme blah 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 blah. Inscriptio. Yep. Cool. The title of this book, therefore, as described by the scribe of Papyrus 1, would therefore be the Book of the Genealogy of the Son of Jesus Christ, the Son of David, the Son of Abraham, which is obviously false, as I demonstrated before. It's almost a carbon copy of Genesis chapter 5, which is well into an existing work and isn't trying to be a title of the entire work, and yet it does say the Book of the Genealogies of Adam, which is extremely similar to the Book of the Genealogy of Jesus Christ, the Son of David. It's simply describing what is there. He doesn't actually even attempt to make sense of how on earth this makes sense as a title for a work who the vast majority of it is about the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Naming the entire work after just the genealogy. Has he considered that maybe that just doesn't make sense? No, he doesn't, because he doesn't consider the possibility that it's simply naming the first section of the work, not the actual entire work itself. So, and he says the earliest extant title of the book would therefore indicate that there was no authorship ascribed to the book itself, and the later titles, which eventually ascribed some form of divinity to the book's authorship, were a product of the eventual. This is a total non sequitur, as I demonstrated before. Total non sequitur, absolute non sequitur, because many works of antiquity, particularly historical works, and like, for example, the commentaries of Caesar, do not give their author in the text itself. Okay. And for the vast majority of these works, we don't have their earliest manuscripts. So for all we know, those manuscripts could have also lacked a title as well, and therefore, they're totally anonymous. It's a matter of unequal weights and measures. Totally doesn't work. And again, as we showed, this is false anyway, because the top of Papyrus 1 is missing. We don't actually know whether there was or was not a title. And there almost certainly was, given how before that time that gospel was already assumed widely to be the gospel according to Matthew. Not to mention how in the ancient world there are many ways to actually attach the authorship of the author of a work to the work itself. It could be in the body of the text. It could also be simply as a little tag attached to the work itself, or in a totally different thing, piece of writing entirely. For example, with the Library of Alexandria, I did a little research of this for some classes I taught. It was just for a little feature of the class. there was a work called the Pinakes, which is in Greek tables. And this was basically the library catalog of the Library of Alexandria. And it included it included the list of works organized according to genre, authors, their works, the authorship of a specific work, where the particular manuscript in the library was obtained from. Really detailed stuff, really, really fascinating. And we do actually have some fragments of it, because otherwise the rest of the thing is lost. But apparently, from what I read, it was like 120 volumes long, or 120 scrolls probably long, which is absolutely bonkers. It's amazing. Epimenides, thank you. That was the poet that Paul quoted. But yes, point being, so the authorship of some works may simply in that library, for example, you see a work, it doesn't name the author. You go to the Pinakes, oh yeah, this is by this dude. There are many ways that the authorship of a work was associated with the work. So it could be a little tag, for example. It could be in the body of the text itself. It could be above the manuscript. There's a bunch of other ways that Simon Gathercole, in his article, the alleged anonymity of the Gospels. You should look it up. I'll post a comment right here so you guys can look it up. Anonymity of the Gospels. And he lists a bunch of different ways that ancient works could have been titled with their authorship, for which almost all the data is lost for the New Testament and pretty much every single other work. Because the vast majority, 99%, the overwhelming majority of manuscripts, let alone actual works themselves from antiquity, have been lost. So to ascribe anonymity to any work, including the New Testament works, simply because we don't have the earliest because there's a lack of alleged attribution in the earliest manuscripts or the earliest authors, is a total non sequitur, absolute total non sequitur, because it ignores the fact that almost all the evidence we could appeal to is simply not there. And yet, by God's providence, we do have good evidence that the Gospels have been written by who they are. We have that evidence through Papias Hierapolis. We have it through Justin Martyr. We have it through partial quotations by, for example, Polycarp or even First Clement, albeit with some changes. And that's why I want to look up. That's why I want to research, because some people could say with Clement that, it was a floating tradition because it's different to Matthew's Gospel and Luke's, therefore some other free-flowing tradition. I want to look up if that was actually a thing in classical antiquity for when authors quote a work, they actually kind of paraphrase it a little bit and they put it in their own words, so they don't always quote it word for word, which is why, by contrast, Eusebius of Caesarea is so incredible because he quotes his sources word for word. He's really freaking cool that way. But yes, so there's that. What was I going to mention? I say Papias, Justin Martyr, First Clement, Polycarp. We have also, what's his name? Theophilus of Antioch. We have him. We have even a heretic, Heraclitus, who talks about, I believe, names John's Gospel, I want to say. But yeah, point being, and there's others. There's a bunch of others too. Simon Gathercole actually lists out these references. He actually only includes people who explicitly ascribe an author. He actually doesn't include many early authors who otherwise quote from a gospel directly, which thus entails that they believe these were authentically the words of Christ, and thus presumably they got this from someone who they thought could give to them the words of Christ, which makes perfect sense, which perfectly coheres with the theory that they were actually written by the apostles. Could you technically say, oh, maybe it was by someone else? Yeah, technically it could, but there's no reason to think that. The theory that the authorship of the Gospels are authentic best explains all the evidence we have. Simple as that. But yeah, so it's a good article. Get that. Highly recommend it. Anyway, I'm going to finish up right now. Point being, this is crap scholarship. Not very good at all. And yeah, so yeah, please do. If you guys want to see more of this, I've got more stuff coming up. So in a couple of days, I'm starting to get the ball rolling on like weekly stream lessons. So I want to frame it like a classroom lesson where I have a topic, I teach it, I have slides, I use those. So stuff I've done with my First Clement presentation and my Purgatory Proof Text presentation. I want to make these weekly and on the specific themes that I have picked. So at any given time, I have 2 content themes, one for history, one for Bible and theology. The current one for Bible and theology right now is the theology of the sexes and responses to egalitarianism. And by the way, my Galatians 3:28 video is almost done, just a little bit more editing left. It's the more annoying parts. And then for the history theme right now, we have the ideal historian. So I'll be going through various ancient and then maybe a couple of modern works talking about what the qualities of an ideal historian, how a historian ought to be in their disposition, how they ought to behave, all that jazz. And so yeah, those are the themes happening right now. And every week I'm going to alternate between a lesson of each theme. So this week, in a couple of days, is going to be part 1 of the Ideal Historian lesson series. And that's going to be looking at Lucian of Samosata. Going to be very, very good, fascinating look. Then next week, we're going to be on the theology of the sexes. And that's specifically going to be looking at Paul's household code in Ephesians 5-6 and Colossians chapter 3. And then after that, another of the Ideal Historian. And then after that, another on the theology of the sexes, and so on and so forth until a theme is exhausted, and then I replace it with a new theme. So yeah, that's how it's working. And as you can see with the banner below, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to support my work, I could definitely use it. I would highly appreciate it if you become a patron, whether for one of the tiers or even a custom pledge below the $5 Australian minimum tier. You can do that as well, just fine. I would highly appreciate it if you do become a patron, so I can make this like proper work, make it a job, and thus be able to do it at least part-time, which would be fantastic, higher quality, more frequent. And yeah, many nice bonuses as well in the patrons on the various tiers. So for example, with $10 tier, you get access to the Museon, where you can learn Latin so far with a Latin instructor. And I want to eventually get more people, dedicated instructors for different things, including myself one day. And you get access to the research notes section, where I basically just splurge out my detailed notes on my studies that I'm currently doing at the moment, which could, God willing, help you as well in any similar studies. And what else does $10 get you? $10 also gets you early access to blog posts, and the early access will allow you to give any feedback should you find anything that you think could be done better or changed, and that could affect the final draft. So yes, and I'm thinking of more bonuses over time. Higher tiers get more bonuses as well. And I'm thinking of more nice patron bonuses, which would make sense and hopefully attract people. Or if not, I would also highly appreciate that if you have considered becoming a patron but choose not to, I would highly appreciate also if you message somewhere, maybe giving your feedback, what do you think I could do better with Patreon that would potentially incentivize you or other people to become patrons, because it's slow. I wish I had more. I've had only 2 patrons for a very long time, but I definitely could appreciate others. Yeah, and I'm still trying to find ways how to grow it. I've taken all the expert advice, and yeah, it's not growing fast. So yeah, God willing, feedback would help. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, hope you had a wonderful day. God bless.